In our first PD session for 2024 to 25, Sal looks at planning a library year. She considers the coordination of routine administration, building in teaching and learning, library events, and training. An important theme is how you can extend the influence of the library through careful planning. Sal.
Hi, yeah, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending where you are. Firstly, thank you for coming. It's lovely to see so many of you here today. So I think in terms of looking at the areas that we have to plan over the year, it's kind of important to not get overwhelmed by everything. It's very easy to do so. So how we've approached it is, as Andy says, we've split them into these areas. So we've got the routine administrative tasks of a day-to-day librarian, or things that you have to do every day. You'll all know things like shelving, so on, managing the kids. And then we've got the learning and the teaching, and they're the two, if you like, main prongs of what goes on in a library. And they're things that we don't overlook. We know we have to do those. But within that, it's obviously also important to plan the library events, whether they're like, important World Book Week events or smaller things that go on in your library. And we didn't want to ignore the library influence aspect. And by that, we mean kind of reaching out to the community and making sure that everyone is knows about what the library offers, knows what we can give, and that we're not working in isolation. And then finally, so often neglected, I think, well, probably in any organisation, I don't know that, but training and networking for us as librarians is also hugely important, and also training and networking so other people, again, know what we do. So we've got those key areas that we need to make sure are built into our yearly calendar. And then the other thing what we're hoping to look at together is how often we do which tasks. So it's quite a logistical, it's like a jigsaw really. So whether some things, as I said, will be daily, others weekly, monthly, terming. So we need to be figuring out when we're planning to do what,
So how do I get the key?
Prioritize, and what we should not do, like pitfalls to avoid. I can hear someone chatting away. I don't know if there's a bit of sound interference, or we just need to.
Yeah, I should have said earlier on, could everyone make sure that their mics are on mute so we don't pick up any background noise or conversations? That would be great. Sorry, Sal, to interrupt. And we've moved on to the routine admin tasks now. So perhaps you can just pick it up from there, Sal.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just getting distracted because people keep popping up all the time. It's wonderful to see you all. I have to make sure I'm concentrating on the task in hand. So these are the routine admin tasks that I immediately thought of, and what we'll be asking in a little while if we've missed things and if anyone can think of other things. So, I mean, we put budget in there. It's obviously it is routine. We need to be considering it, but it's a biggie. Yeah, we'll be looking at prioritizing that. But then there's just the regular book borrowing and returns, how we organize the library, how we zone it, both in terms of the books and collaborative areas, things like that. How we manage our subscriptions, everything to do with technology. When we do an inventory of what resources we have, because these things will be all affected, I guess, depending on how far we're along the journey of library organisation. So a brand new library setting up, it'll be very different to an established library. How often we check the stock, and we're just really keen to know what everyone else thinks works well in their own library environment. So how we manage the budget. Go on, Andy.
I think that's a really important point, Sal, what you're making. We're really keen to know what you think about these routine things. Just put it in the chat box and build it in, and we'll call you in to ask your views later on. That will be really great. But I guess these are the things that you're doing week in, week out, Sal, and at the same time, you're also thinking about some other bigger things as well. So while this is going on in the background, perhaps we'll move on to the next area, which is all about learning and teaching. That's a big area of your work and needs to be planned, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So as I say, it's kind of the two main prongs of organising a library. So it's huge. I mean, we were talking earlier the other day, Andy, about how libraries are kind of almost like a mini school within a school. So we need to be looking at how we plan, deliver, and assess, if we even do assess learning and teaching. So that's a huge topic for looking at. And it can't be done in isolation. It depends on the school's ethos and what we've kind of believe and have bought into, I guess, as part of our education vision. But I mean, obviously, we're all encouraging reading, we're all having to manage behaviour. Safeguarding is important wherever we are. We need a positive learning environment. And, you know, Andy, that's a biggie for me, looking at the sort of making the library a real safe space for children, well, for everyone. Then we need to look at which literacy programs we're going to use if we do that, and how and when we'll collaborate with the teachers and other staff. We've also put organising reading events in there. It comes up later as well, because that's part of learning and teaching. So they're just a few, that and the last slide, of the things we have to do. And I guess what we're looking at today is how we can make sure none of that's overlooked, and actually whether we have overlooked anything as part of that.
I think our own view, Sal, is that the library is at the heart, at the centre of a school. And I think that view is shared by everyone we've talked to. And the impact on teaching and learning that a library can have is massive. So, okay, we've looked at the admin and the routine stuff that has to be done and has to be continually done and organised and built into your calendar. But I think resting on that is the ability to profoundly influence the learning that's going on in the school. So organizing those things and talking to people all the time, talking to the right people all the time about what they're doing. And you've got some important points there about talking to teachers and talking to teacher leaders. Perhaps you can think about some of the key meetings you've had in the past that's had a big impact on learning. And perhaps other people can put into the chat box what they do to make sure that the library is at the heart of teaching and learning in any school. Sal first, and then please put in the chat box if you'd like to make some comments.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So basically, as I was saying, have we actually missed anything? You know, if you can think of something that we just haven't even talked about, put that in the chat box. I'll tell you one thing I did in terms of both learning and teaching and admin. I kept in touch with the head or the executive principal or whatever the label is. And I don't know if that's good practice or not, Andy. You'll know as an ex-head, but I just thought it was always so important to kind of have that link to the school leaders, because if they care, then your job is so much easier. And I kind of tend to work from there, I guess, in many ways.
I think this is one of the most important points you're making in this session, Sal. I used to have regular meetings with my heads, my librarians, when I was a head. And you really do need to hear firsthand about what's going on. You can hear it second or third hand all the time as a principal. But when you meet the librarian directly, he or she has got an absolute opportunity to tell you firsthand, we're doing this, we're linking with that, and this is what's going to happen. So being briefed by the librarian, maybe, or at least once a term, maybe even twice a term in one of the long terms, I would say is really important. And the head can say to you, okay, that's interesting. Why don't you talk to so-and-so? And then the networking grows. That's
absolutely
important.
Yeah, and something else I think is quite important, and I'm not going to profess that I was always very good at this, is getting to as many whole school meetings as you can, and kind of just make your presence known there. The problem is often, you know, you're in the library after school supervising children or helping children, so it's hard to go to the meetings as well. But I think that's a really good way of sort of staying in touch with what's happening across the school and what initiatives are going on and so on. Where I couldn't do that, something I used to do was try and get to a faculty meeting. I would go in, take it in turns to go to all the faculty meetings. I didn't always enjoy it, I'll be honest, but I thought it was really important to know what was happening, not just in English, but across the whole school, sort of curriculum-wise and development-wise. And then I was in a much better position to go talk to those middle leaders about how we can make those connections, particularly, I think, for the learning and teaching, particularly for that.
I think you're absolutely right. You're making a really important point there, Sal, by saying not just the English teachers. I mean, when you think about the other faculties and the other areas in the school, think about, I don't know, PE teachers. How often do you see PE teachers in the library? What have you got that could offer them? If there isn't much going on in terms of what's involved with physical education in the library, well, meet the PE head and say, okay, we'd like to do more with you. And perhaps it's not the very first thing that a head of PE will think of in terms of going into the library and talking to the librarian. So I think very interesting idea there, just to talk to as many different people as you can. And don't just think about the library in terms of language. I think that's important.
Yeah, there's an interesting comment in the chat box about the extended essay and the level of involvement that librarians have in that. And I know that's one that always, has people have very different views on it, because it's a big role, and it's that sense of being part of things but not having things kind of dumped on the library, if you like. There's such a big difference between the centre of learning and the part of everything and a tag on. It's like, oh, well, we're not sure what to do with this. Let's hand it over to the library. But I think that's fascinating to look at how formal assessment, things like the extended essay, are involved as well.
Perhaps we could just ask Abba to talk us through that. Abba, who's at the British School in Delhi. You've said that you've taken on this responsibility for the extended essay, which I think is very interesting. Abba, can you just unmute and talk us through how that works? Perhaps Abba's not there. Maybe we'll come back to that when we talk to Ema.
I was looking at just there, Nisha said that there's a staff room in the library, which means that teachers will go in. And that's wonderful, isn't it, for browsing the professional development books, being part of everything, being there to chat to save a lot of legwork going elsewhere. I think that's a fantastic idea. We used to have I don't know if people have come across the Ladybird series of books. They're kind of comic books on how to be a teacher, and they're satirical, I think. And we used to also try to make sure we had some fun books for staff coming in, and plenty of magazines, and just kind of small factors really, but a little bit over and above to get everybody involved. And then the more people you can talk to, then you can plan what you have to do over the year, I guess.
I think that idea of the staff room in the library, Nisha, you put that in. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that works and how you're encouraging people on the staff to come into the library?
Hi, Andy. Hi, Flint, and everyone out there. So, staff rooms generally become areas where teachers come and rest, and there's a lot of, I shouldn't say generalize it, but it's not really a very constructive conversation that happens. So we've shifted this space entirely onto the library, which ensures that a teacher is walking in and out of that space, and invariably, when they see the books, there's a tendency that they would pick up a book. And then the librarian also ensures that there are sections which are dedicated to the subject areas, and that is where the seating arrangement of that particular teacher is. So it's not an extra effort that a teacher makes, because they do have a busy schedule. So the time that they're just sitting down on the couch or talking or doing their work, they are surrounded by books. So that's what we've been trying to do for many years, and I see that it always ends up working.
Fantastic, Nisha. Can you tell us what school you're at?
I'm working with Vishwa Samudra Group, which runs a school for the underprivileged children.
Wow.
And the school is a very interesting school, because it's a high-end school, the first of its kind in the entire country, which is called Nanda Gokulam Life School. And we serve the underprivileged children.
Okay. And that's in India, is it?
It's in India. It's in south of India. I didn't realize that my camera was off.
Oh, no, not a problem. Not a problem at all.
South of India. It's a small three-tier town called Nellore. That's where we are based. And our head office is Vishwasamudra from Hyderabad. That's again in south of India. And this is the first a school with international facilities for the lesser privileged children. So it's an all residential school for boys. And we just started operations about 3 months ago.
I'd really like to hear more about that school at a later date and find out much more, because it sounds like a very interesting initiative. We know that international education isn't available to everybody in any country. So it's great to hear this initiative being taken, and to hear about the library being such an important part of that. So I know that Abby had a little bit of a problem with her microphone earlier on. I'm not sure whether she's resolved it. Are you able to come in now, Abba? No, I don't think she has. So let's move on. And thanks very much, Nisha and Sal.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just thinking while you were talking. I was looking at the questions that we've actually asked everyone on there, and how we coordinate with middle leaders and finding that time to meet and so on. And it struck me the importance really of having in all the school policies that these meetings should be taking place. Because if they're in the librarian's job description and also, the middle leaders or whoever's job descriptions, then I think that's just when you're kind of going through and you're thinking, have I done everything I'm supposed to have done? It's just one more little way of making sure that you are connecting and reminding yourself of the need to be out there.
Absolutely. I wonder if I might take the liberty of asking Katie, who's at Tanglin Trust School, how you sort of engage with leaders in that way and do the kind of things that Sal and Nisha have been talking about, and how it works in a very, very big school like Tanglin, which has got so much going on. If you are able to make a comment, we'd love to hear from you. Katie, could you make a comment about that?
So I'm here with Nara Lee, who's my colleague, and we're both in the senior school library here. And we're just automatically included in a lot of meetings and feel very lucky. And a little bit, I think the one thing, trying to force a little bit more connection with our English department, which sounds kind of weird to admit because it should be the easiest department. But because they don't have classroom libraries, they kind of just depend on us to be doing the reading stuff. We are part of the IB, the diploma, and the extended essay team and the EPQ team. And that we're just an integral members of that, planning the days, planning the lessons. So we're strongly included with middle school children and sixth form. IGCSE years are like the wasteland.
The wasteland is an interesting way of putting it.
Well, they don't seem to need much library support, and so a regular way of seeing them.
Yeah, they're not reading or inquiring, apparently. You're not doing any inquiry and any reading when they're in the IGCSE. But
oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. It was the same. I worked at the British school in Vietnam, in Hanoi. It was exactly the same, a bit of a wasteland. But yeah, having direct. So Katie reports and regularly meets with the deputy head of secondary. At my previous school, I reported directly to the head of secondary. That does make a huge difference, because I don't know about Katie, but I've worked in schools where the head didn't know what was going on and I didn't know what was going on, and it was really hard to find out what was happening in departments. But when you are included in faculty meetings and when you've got the direct line to the head, well, deputy head, that makes a huge difference. Yeah,
I can imagine it would. And I think we go back to the routine side of things, making sure that you're routinely included in those meetings so that it's an expectation. Can I just ask you one more question, Katie, because our guest later on today, David Porritt, who's the principal of the British Budapest school, he was the head of the junior school at Tanglin, as you must know. And
yes,
he had the experience of being there when the library in its, well, I think its current format was starting to be built up, and it had a profound influence on him. He just couldn't believe it. Changed his attitude to libraries, which I think is very, very interesting. How do you keep in touch with your fellow librarians in other parts of the school as well?
So it's true, Tanglin. So it's funny because I was just saying to Nerly, I said, David Port, I think he used to work here at Tanglin because I recognized the name and I was going to wait to see his face. But and I think the junior library right now is being gutted and renovated. And I believe it's 25 years old. So I'm going to say, if that's what he's referring to, is the opening of that junior library. The senior library here is 15 years old because we're having a birthday party next month for it. And there are two other libraries. So there's an infant library and an infant teacher librarian, and a junior library and a junior teacher librarian, and then two of us in senior school. And the second teacher librarian and senior library was when I came 5 years ago. And I'll tell you, I think it's made a really big difference. Everybody is amazed what adding another teacher librarian, but it's like, we have a lot of staff, we have a lot of space. I think it's highly unusual. We feel very, very lucky. And I do think that when new teachers come from the UK and they come to the school, they are just amazed at the library and how well resourced it is and how well integrated. And they almost don't know how to use us because they're not used to it. I mean, I'm not speaking for all British schools, but just saying it's.
Yeah. So we do meet regularly with the other two teacher librarians, and also where Katie is actually the head of our international network, school network in Singapore too, right? So that keeps us, we're very connected to the other schools, the American school, the Canadian school, UWC, and we do get together 4 times a year and share lots of ideas. We run our book competition, Red Dot, together. That really helps when you can have that network. I had a similar network in Hong Kong and a slightly smaller but similar network in Vietnam. So that's one thing, if you can connect with librarians in your city.
If you can connect with librarians, that's going to be a big theme for us, because that's why we're here. That's our role, to help you connect with each other. And Rob George, Katie, has told me a lot about what goes on in those areas. And Rob's a very old colleague of mine, and I know that you know him very well in that networking. You're very lucky in those areas where so many international schools. But one of the things that we're finding out is that there are people who are relatively isolated and don't have that contact with the immediate vicinity. So we are making that the subject of our third PD session on sharing, connecting and sharing, and making sure that we can take advantage of all those ideas. So thank you so much for that. And I love that. I actually saw that library being set up 25 years ago. So
some great points there. When we've got more time, I'd love to come back to that GCSE problem you're facing as well, having always been sort of really involved in British schools, but I guess not now because we
need to move on. But I've made a note of exactly the same thing. I think that terminology you used, the GCSE wasteland, that's very striking. And I want to follow that up. And by the way, we're thinking very much of focus on research and extended essays and EPQs in term 2. And we've got some very interesting people that we want to invite into this as well in term 2 after the new year. But we're going to move on now. So Sal, take us through events. Because this is what people think of as a library year. It's just all about events. It's important, isn't it?
It is important. I'll be super quick because we're always struggling for time. So on the list there are just some suggestions of things that happen. In many, I can't say in most, but in many school libraries. So the student and parent book clubs, lots of challenges like the Readers' Theatre, cross-year group competitions. Then we have the author visits, and we're managing sort of arranging them either in isolation or ideally with other schools, but that brings with it its own complications in terms of setting up. So they're big jobs, and they need putting in the calendar. Again, like we'll be hoping you'll be able to tell us how and when, but I would have them put in the calendar a whole year ahead of time, not necessarily planned for, but so that they're expected and they're in the whole school calendar, not just the library calendar and the overview.
That's so important, the whole school calendar. I think that coordination cell is so important. Sorry to interrupt. It's just as a head's perspective. if I can see it coming, and if it's planned well in advance. I mean, you will have to plan well in advance for things like an author's visit, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. I mean, and lots of us here will have even worked together on those author visits, and there's companies you can use and so on, but it still takes plenty of planning. So on the next slide, we've got various questions that we were hoping you'd be able to perhaps share your thoughts on as well. Who the most people to talk to were obviously the heads, the school leaders and so on, but also parents and PTG, perhaps they could get those involved. We'd love to know what regular events you're involved with. And even if we, maybe not necessarily now, but please do put them in the chat box and keep in touch, because it's sort of once this session's over today, I seem to always be at my computer, and I just love to chat with the librarians. So do keep in touch, because then we can share this information by all kinds of means. And any, I guess, lessons you've learned about planning. It's useful sometimes, I think, to reflect on what's gone wrong, and then other people can not make those mistakes in the future. So anything you've learned that you would do differently if we were looking again. So yeah, regular events. I mean, we've got the book weeks. We've got we had perhaps too many events. It would take over. And again, it's back to that question of prioritizing.
I think absolutely right. I'm going to come back to the PE department, because they're the kind of people I'd really like to bring into the library. One of the things that I saw during the week was a visit to the Geneva International School of Geneva, Flint, by Michael Johnson, the great American sprinter. Now, imagine bringing in a sports person like that and making sure he's not only in the gym and the sports hall, but also comes to the library to tell his life story, to tell about the important parts of his life, and making sure that you're associating high-profile guests to the school who might be part of another program, but associating their name and their presence and their persona with the school library. I'm wondering what exactly Michael Johnson did at Ecolint, but I wouldn't be surprised if Conrad Hughes, as the principal there, had him in the library to talk about his life. So it's that kind of thing that we're thinking about, Sal.
Yeah. Also, I was just thinking, when you are, it's just kind of a random thought that's come to my mind. When you are planning the events, do keep in mind things like when the exams are, because the library, as you all know, has different purposes at different times of the year. So when you're going to need more space for quiet study time, when lots of the kids are going to be missing because maybe they'll be at home on study leave. So again, it's that keeping, the whole picture of the school, not just we're not planning a library kind of visit in isolation. And I do say that from experience of getting a secondary author in, or an author for the secondary school, and then kind of figuring out that 12, 13 and 11 were all out of school for some reason. And, so you live and learn. But library events, over to you, Andy, to introduce Ema.
To introduce Ema. And I think you never said a truer word there, Sal. Coordinating library events with things like exams, because I'd like to introduce Ema Kazmi, who's the head of English, the English lead coordinator at the British School in New Delhi, who's here with her librarian, Abba, today. And I first got to know Ema when she wrote an article for International Teacher magazine, which we run and we publish, and lots of library articles in it. And she wanted to tell us about the literary lunches that she was running. So, Ema, it's a great pleasure to have you here. Perhaps you can just take over and tell us what is a literary lunch and how it came about.
Thank you, Andy. I think first I just want to say yet again that the whole idea behind writing that article was to take something which we had built here at the British School and which started working really well, and put that out there in the community to see if any other schools would want to adapt a similar model, or sort of use it and make it a part of their school calendar. So what is a literary luncheon? Maybe to answer that question, I'll go back a little bit in time and talk about why the necessity for a literary luncheon. This came from a lot of conversations that we would have with parents who would come back and tell us, but our children aren't really reading. What can we do to make sure that they keep reading? It was also a frustration, I guess, in general, that we felt in terms of the fact that sometimes when you're working in the bounds of a strict curriculum, there isn't scope for you to be able to talk about a diverse range of books, as diverse as you would want it to be in your classroom. And I think as teachers, we felt, okay, where is the space to be able to talk to the students about books that connect with them, books that they want to bring in, books that align with their interests and preferences. It's interesting that somebody mentioned, Katie had mentioned this idea of the IGCSE wasteland earlier, because I feel like that was a big part for us too. We have, in our middle years, we have a weekly reading lesson. So we do get to take our students to the library, and there's a whole ecosystem that we've built around wider reading with them. For our pre-IGCSE year, which is grade 9, we have a fortnightly reading lesson. So it's a little bit less than the middle years, but there's still time to take them to the library, help them find books of their interest. And that just sort of stops at IGCSE because of the requirements of the timetable, the demands of the curriculum. And we did feel that somewhere over there, the conversations around books and reading were just beginning to stall. Sometimes the books that the IGCSE curriculum would require us to teach were not necessarily books that would appeal to our students. They were from a different time period, from a completely different sort of universe, and it would take a little time to get our students excited about those. So as we were talking about this, we said, all right, what do we have at our disposal? How about using lunch breaks and capitalizing on the fact that a lot of students, for students, lunch break is like a loosely structured slot in what is otherwise a very regimented school day. So let's bring in something of their interest there and create an opportunity where people who love talking about books can just get together in one same room. So we decided, thinking of this as a very sort of low stakes but highly effective space where you could just come in and talk, but you were not being graded, you were not being assessed. There was no rubric, there wasn't any set criteria that you had to live up to. All you had to do was show up with a book that you wanted to talk about. You'd get pizza, you'd get pastries, you'd get iced teas and juice, and it would just be like a normal conversation. I think what was one thing that we were very clear about from the beginning was that it would be student-led. So we started inviting interest-based proposals from students that would you like to host a luncheon which is based around perhaps a genre that you're interested in, or a style of writing, or a topic that you're keen on. So our first luncheon ended up being around Valentine's Day, and some of our IB students wanted to do something around romance, romance in fiction, and what does that mean to different people. So they came in and they spoke to us about the type of prompts that they wanted to discuss, and that just got things started. There was also an interesting question on your previous slide about what lessons have you learned as you keep organizing these events. And I think for us, for our first lit luncheon, we thought, it's about books, how many kids are going to turn up, maybe a few of them. And we didn't do a sign-up sheet. We just said, come to room E5 if you're interested in, coming and have a chat about your books. And we ran out of chairs, we ran out of food, we ran out of everything because it became so popular. And I think that's what got it started. The students came in, it was a U-shaped formation in the room. There's a picture in there that sort of, gives you an insight into what it usually looks like. We'd always have student leads who might have some discussion prompts on the screen behind them. And then they facilitate the conversation. And then it becomes a little free-flowing. So people will start holding up their books and talking about why they have bought this particular book to recommend, or they will align what they're discussing specifically with the prompts. So for example, when we had a luncheon about historical fiction, the prompts became things like, do you think it's an ethical responsibility of the writer to adapt or to present history in a manner that is realistic and fair to all parties? And it leads to some really interesting conversations. In fact, we had a lit luncheon just 2 days back, and the broad topic for this one was feminist writing. So you can imagine how absolutely varied and wide that became. And some really interesting questions about, is feminist writing for women, by women, and about women? As simple as that. And that led to some really interesting conversations in the room. So that's where the idea came from. And then it just became part of the recurring school cycle. Different teachers from the department take a lead in terms of becoming the teacher lead. Even though it's a student-led event, they become the contact point in terms of looking at prompts, helping students do the setup in the room. I know Abha's on the call as well right now, but Abha has a very active role to play in these. ABHA and sometimes the students who are our library ambassadors, which is another program that we have running, help us in curating books for each luncheon. So students who walk in can also walk around, look at the books, even sometimes reserve them, from the library, and send around curated reading lists based on a genre. Would you like me to continue on talking ahead, or would you like to ask me questions?
I think that's brilliant, Ema. What you said just sets it, it makes it so real. And I've read about it, now hearing you talk about it. I kind of jokingly said when you put the post on LinkedIn the other day, we're hoping to see hashtag literary libraries now around the world. And I think it's such a great initiative, and it's such a great example of how we can learn from each other, and so vibrant. I think 2 or 3 things there: student-led, and the fact that you're not measuring, you're just enjoying. And I think there's not enough of that in schools today, especially high sort of pressure schools where exams are important. I think if people can put questions into the chat box, and if you can keep an eye on them, Ema, I'll bring them up later on as we go through. But I think you've actually put together something there that is going to extend the influence of the library, and people are going to be talking about the library and books and reading in a slightly different way, and the fact that ABBA is so involved in it. So thank you for that. We'll come back to you when the questions, I hope, start coming in. David Porritt is going to be with us this afternoon, and he's got a rather different story. It's a great story, and it's about how the setting up of the library at Tanglin Trust School in the early days when it was becoming the school that it is now just profoundly influenced him. And he was talking about the library as a place to be. I'm not going to talk too much about that now. In fact, I'm not going to talk any more about that now, but both Ema's article and David's article is in International Teacher Magazine, which is another part of our network. We run and publish ITM, and we would really like librarians and people interested in books and reading and writing to write for us. So we'll send you on the links to those articles, and I'll ask Sally to pick up the story there in terms of how all of this extends a library's influence.
Yeah, that was just so good to hear, wasn't it? Because it's just kind of uplifting that everything great about schools where, the teachers and the students are together just having a wonderful time with books. It's just makes me feel good. But anyway, so yeah, and that of course is part of library influence. And I think, sometimes library influence just happens if we're doing great things, then people notice that and our impact becomes known. But I think it's also just back to the kind of the topic of today, important to actually build that into our calendar, to make a kind of conscious, active plan of telling the world that the libraries matter and informing them about the role we can play. And it's important for all the reasons listed on the slide, so for promoting literacy, just supporting the whole school education. Community engagement is huge for me, making those connections. And then I think, was it Abba before was telling us where his sound went when then he got it back, and how we enhance access to information. And it sounds like with his program, and being involved in the extended essay and so on, he's involved with research programs, which are the best websites to use, which are the best subscriptions to buy into, how to avoid plagiarizing, all those kind of things. Yeah, so they're all part of our library influence that we need to calendar into the year. So yeah, research and inquiry, just learning, it's just huge, it's important. Let's not ignore it, and let's get it into that calendar is what I would say.
So it's pushing the library forward, isn't it? And allowing the space for it to happen when people like Ema, and by the way, welcome to Kate from Nigeria, who's just joined us. Great to have you here, and wonderful to have someone from Nigeria joining this particular session. So
greetings to you all. I'm glad to be part of you. So I'm trying to understand what the meeting is all about. I just joined.
So Kate, we've been talking about planning a library year, and we've been talking about events, and we've just heard from Ema, who's the head of English at the British School of Delhi, who has been talking about literary lunches, and we'll be following up about that a little bit later on during the course of the session. But great to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I'd like to ask Sally just to move on, and let's reflect on how you can grow your influence by planning your library year, and planning your library year with influencing the rest of the school in mind. So Sal, perhaps you could just talk us through these questions, and I'll see if everybody's putting ideas in the chat box.
Yeah, of course. So we've got lots of questions on there to ask everyone else. One thing I'd just like to pull out is cultivating parents. And I think that is hugely important, because particularly if you're trying to promote reading and encouraging children to read at home, but also parents, I think we can all say here, can sometimes be challenging in a library, in that they kind of use it as their own hangout zone, but with no reference to what libraries are about. Not all parents, and not always, but it does happen. So I think if you can find a way of encouraging parents to really get on board with the reading and the supervising children with the reading in the library, that's huge. We used to do that by things, just kind of asking for suggestions, really following up, encouraging the whole library team to talk to the parents. A lot of communication, I think, made a huge difference to creating the library as beyond the school, and showing that it really was part of the community.
I think that's a really important part of it, Sal. And I'm wondering how people communicate with their parents. If people have got ideas, how do you reach out to your parents, and how do you get them involved? And how do you talk to them? One of the things as a head of school that I was always doing was meeting the PTA regularly, so at least twice a term, if not a little bit more, and asking to go to a PTA meeting might not seem the obvious thing to do. But if you are wanting to promote your library and to extend the influence of the library so it becomes part of your whole community, I think it's absolutely essential to get parents involved. And an obvious way of doing it is to get invited to the next PTA meeting so that you can, spread the word there.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good idea. And also just small things like making sure your displays reflect that the parents know what your interactive displays are about. So if, for example, nursery rhymes with the small kids, so important. And then you can kind of meet with the parents and get them sharing those nursery rhymes with the children. You can invite the parents to come and be the guest storyteller for a session. So once you've got them inside, it's beautiful, really, when everyone is all engaged together in loving books.
So a guest storyteller. Ema put a little comment in the chat box. Ema, perhaps you can talk about inviting parents in as guest speakers at the school. And you had a question, I think it was of Katie from Tanglin, about Red Dot Day. So perhaps Ema, just talk about guest speakers first, and then we'll go on to talk about Red Dot Day.
Okay, great. Right. So for instance, we have a literary festival coming up next month. And for this, when we started looking at who are the different speakers that we want coming in, who will address our students, we always begin by looking at our own community first. So we look at the parent community because it's such a vibrant community, and you have so many different types of professions and interests represented there, from people who are journalists to people who are running their own startup businesses, who have their own podcasts. And that becomes one way. So we sent out sort of feelers out there, and then based on the responses that we get back, we engage in more detailed conversations. I've just been having some really interesting phone calls over the weekend with a lot of different parents, where they've been talking to me about, there's a theater actor, there is a story, like a professional storyteller, and they've been talking to me about what they would like to do with the sessions. And it's so perfect because there's such alignment between what our vision is for the students and what theirs is, because there's already a running relationship between parents and the school. So that becomes an important one. And I think one thing that we have started from last year is just having these big, nicely done up chart papers, flip charts, etc., placed strategically at different places during a parent-teacher conference. So when the parents are physically coming in, it's a space to just invite them to give us some reading suggestions, and we make sure that those are then incorporated into our reading lists so they can see their recommendations making it to the list circulated.
That's really interesting about inviting guest speakers like that.
That's
My
great.
mind goes out to making connections with the careers people, the careers department, and saying, okay, how can we be part of your outreach program to bring in careers talks and perhaps even work experience? But you had a question about Red Dot Day as well, Ema. What was that?
I heard that mention. I hope I heard that correctly, but it was just about the book competition and tapping into, I think, communities and contacts. And I was wondering if you could have some more information about that.
Well, Katie Day from Tanglin has just put a reference in the chat box to Red Dot Day. But perhaps, Katie, you could just spare a couple of minutes now to talk us through what happens and what you do.
So it's funny because Sally will know that we had the Bliss Book Awards and the Bangkok Awards, and it's when the librarians in a country usually or a network set up their own book award, and so you choose books and the kids vote on it, and then you can have Hong Kong, I always, because Narrowly used to work in Hong Kong too, they had Battle of the Books. In Bangkok, in fact, it was at Patna. We had the World Kidlit Quiz we joined. So that wasn't related to a reading list. But in Singapore, it was more modeled. We choose these Red Dot books every year. All the schools buy them. We all read them promote them within our schools. And then we get our kids together and we do, the Reader's Cup was based more on an Australian model. And like we now do it as a Kahoot. And then you have, which book is the kid's favorite book. So the teacher librarians in the network choose the books. Like we have 8 books in 4 categories. But then the kids, we don't care who wins. Each school can have a different winner. The Reader's Cup here in the junior school at Tanglin, I'll tell you, is like a major, major event in the life of the kids. And there's like an internal runoff and oh my gosh, Janine Murphy, the librarian, she's a whiz with a microphone and she gets up there. In the senior school, we just do it a little bit more low key, but it's a great initiative. And I can tell you, so Ema, you in India, you should join you're in high school, but the Neve Academy in Bangalore does the Neve Reading Challenge for kids ages grade 4 to 6. And they run it, and anyone in the world can join this reading challenge. So it's a very interesting model and one that you can do remotely. And then they have the final was just held in Bangalore. Was it a week ago? I went down and they have a stage and they have this guy who's like the top quiz master of all India doing it. It's so professional. And I think if you're in India and you get into the final, the school flies you to, they fly you to Bangalore. Anyway, so reading competitions and having this thing of books, and we only choose books published like within the past 4 years. Then Bangkok was 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. So that's recent books because you're trying to buy these books and get multiple copies, and then you take the multiple copies and you help push them into the classroom libraries.
Yeah, great. And of course, that all needs calendaring in, if that's a phrase. And it's just wonderful. So. And again, shows the importance of that local networking, I think, as well.
I also think, Sal, I think calendaring is going to become a verb or a present participle or something. One thing that has struck me is that quite a few people attending today won't live in areas where those networks exist close at hand. And so what you mentioned there, Katie, that you can participate in the Reading Challenge online anywhere in the world. These are the sorts of things that we want people in this network to find out about by sharing them at sessions like this. Perhaps I could just say that we've just set up a Facebook group for BISLN and a LinkedIn group for BISLN. We'll send you the links to that, but you can find them if you go onto Facebook and ask to become a member, and we'll admit you immediately. And then you can post this sort of stuff on that social media, which we hope will grow and bring perhaps schools that are a little bit more isolated together into this idea of a community that we think can be extended from places like Bangkok, places like Singapore, places like New Delhi, which I think will be fantastic. So really great ideas. I think time is pressing and your time is all valuable. So we're going to push on, Sal. Is that okay?
Yeah, I have so much to share, but yeah, let's move on.
You've got so much to share. We had a very interesting session a couple of weeks ago where we just put out, I'm online, and we didn't organize anything. We just had a chat and people joined us and you talked. So look out for those sessions coming up where we bring people together informally as well as around a theme like growing your influence and planning a school library year. So the training and network, Sal, we've got a networking, we've got to think about that too and getting that
Yeah,
into
well,
calendar.
I mean, ironically, I said at the beginning, didn't I? We've always run out of time to look at our own training and development. Can I just say parents' evenings, though? That's another real important way of influence. Go to the parents' evenings, even though you want to go home. They're important. That's all I'll say about that. Training and networking. Yeah, it is so important, and it's so important, I think, to mentor one another within schools, across schools, and just be there for each other. Webinars and online courses, as well as things like this, like quite advanced qualifications, and there's the teacher librarians and the library programs in masters. I was lucky enough at school for the school to pay quite a lot of getting my librarian qualification, and I think that's maybe quite unusual, but it's worth kind of within your school putting into your calendar, because that's what we're looking at, that you will be requesting professional development, and then if it happens, making sure that it's the times that you can actually go to the various courses. And we've already touched upon networking across a region or an area, and now online networking like us is just wonderful. So lots and lots that can be happening. Curious to know whether and how you do build it into your calendars, and how much maybe other people emphasize it more, some less. Just like to know your opinions, really.
Yeah, and don't neglect yourselves. I think people can forget the importance of training for themselves because they're doing so much for other people.
Yeah.
And I think librarians are such givers to the school. It's important, if you're going to continue to be a giver and to take it to the next level, you've got to really take care of yourself as well. You've got to reach for that oxygen mask first so that you have the knowledge, the background, the skills taken forward continually. And I think you've got a difficulty here because you're batting against some of the big faculties who will be continually pushing for, if you've got a big science faculty or a big math faculty, they are in a position where they got much more political clout within a school, and they tend to be listened to because, they're directly related to teaching and learning, exam results and all that sort of thing. But you are at the basis of everything. So as you grow your influence, that should help you also to take forward and actually request and receive the kind of in-service training that you need to take it forward. And again, Sal, we come back to that relationship with the head teacher, don't we?
Absolutely, yeah. Definitely, completely. And I'm also really intrigued to know what training people have found the most useful. Because for me, over the years, it is definitely meeting with other librarians and listening to presentations and sharing informally. So if anyone wanted to put in the chat box things that they found really useful as training, perhaps formal training that can be calendared in as well. We'd love to see that. I'm busy taking my screenshots, and I think we're recording the session as well, aren't we? So we can
Absolutely, we are.
those things. So shall we whiz on?
Did I hear someone asking a question in the background there? Was someone wanting to come in? Perhaps not, but very important. And Sal is available on email as well, from that email address, admin@consiliumeducation.com. If you've got that kind of reflection, drop a line to her as well, and we'll start building these things in. We've been doing this. We've been reflecting on how you build your influence, and you reflect on your training program, but don't neglect it. Do please share what you found useful and what regular stuff you do, what events you attend. Put it on the social media, share it with Sal, and then actually there are a number of things here that I would really like to pick up as a session in term 2 when we're planning the term 2 session, Sal.
Absolutely, yeah.
Let's move on. We've been talking about planning a school year. We've got a number of discussion points come up. I'm still struck by that phrase IGCSE or GCSE wasteland, and how it seems to be a common experience. So maybe we come back to that. If you have any ideas or things that you want to discuss at these networking sessions, or between each other, put them on the social media and put them in questions to Sal, and we'll take it forward.
Yeah, one thing
Yes, someone was just coming in there, Sal, I think.
Okay.
Someone?
Maybe a slight delay on my
No.
machine.
But maybe you can just talk quickly about this idea of creating a template for a school year before we conclude.
Yeah. So one thing I always like is kind of an actual resource that I can go to help me with things, and I like a freebie as well. So what I was hoping was in fact, what I will do is put together some kind of overview of all the things that we need to plan in a school year, some suggestions of when, how often, and so on. But it would be much more fun to not do it in isolation. So if anyone would like to kind of jump aboard and help me put that document together, that then we'll be able to share with our own BISLN community, that would be great. But either way, that will be being produced in the next couple of weeks or so.
I think that would be fantastic if people could join in and get that kind of sharing and cooperating and collaborating. I've just got to say that in the website we're about to sort of throw open, Sal's already put some fantastic resources together from last year, and Rob, with all sorts of different links and ideas about well-being in the library, arranging an author's visit, library literacies, and so on. So we're collating all of those and putting them on the single website. And we would really like to share as much of your stuff as well in the same kind of way. That's the idea for the members. So moving on, joining BISLN, please do join us. We now are in a position, I think, where we've got a circulation list of about 140 people, and we're hoping as many of those people as possible will join us as a school. And when we send you the web link out, you can join us. It will cost €125 for a year's admissions, a year's membership, which we don't think is a huge amount of money. And perhaps you can get it from your library training budget or the whole school training budget. But that will enable us to carry on and build on what we've already started over the last year and help us create this sort of networking platform, which we think is so important. And perhaps at that point, Sal, I can just say a special welcome to Kanak from Kids Inc. Now, we've got two categories of paid membership. The first one is schools, and that's 125. But we've also got affiliates joining us as well. And Kids Inc. are the first people to join us as an affiliate member. They're a design company based in Dubai, a very exciting design company. Kanak, are you there? Could you just say a few words and introduce yourself?
Hello, hi. Hi.
Hi, Kanak.
Hi. First of all, I would just like to say that I'm a little bit sick, so I apologize in advance. But I'm really, really happy to be here and to listen to everybody share their perspective, their opinions, and discussing about the libraries. I'm Kana, and I'm a furniture concept designer. I'm currently working on library spaces, and we actually speak to different staff members, people from the school, and our primary focus is the students. So we want to design to cater the needs of the students as well as the staff members, the librarians, the teachers, and everybody who is interacting with the library space. And our goal is to do in-depth research before designing anything. So every time we get in touch with different people, the students as well sometimes, and we try to gather as much information as we can. But it's always nice to attend these kind of events to learn more, like what exactly the librarians and the schools want, so that we can actually create something that will like make a difference, will actually bring some change, and it will influence the students and the teachers everywhere.
Kanak, thank you so much for being here, and give my best wishes to everyone at KidsLink in Dubai. It leads very nicely into our next session, which is week beginning November the 11th. We haven't set the actual day yet, but we're going to be talking about library design. Sal's going to be talking at a conference in the Netherlands on school design with special reference to libraries in 7th and 8th of November, isn't it, Sal?
I think it's the 8th and 9th, but yeah.
8th and 9th, okay. And if you're anywhere, well, you won't be from this group of people anywhere near, it'll be a great one to go to. But what we aim to do there is to invite designers, architects, and furniture suppliers in to be part of the presentation in November. And what we want to hear from you guys is what particular issues you think that they should be bearing in mind as they start approaching, you know, good library design. So we need to hear your ideas about that. And if you can get in touch with Sal, that would be great. We will be sending you more details about that session very soon, and we'll be sending you more details about how to join BISLN. It'll be hopefully a very easy credit card payment, very painless, and taking that forward like that. We'll be sending you those links very soon. And in December, we'll be talking about budgeting, saving, and sharing. So some of the things that you've already talked about today are also going to be very relevant. Sal, any last thoughts?
Not really. I was just looking, it's going to be exciting to be looking at the library design. Really just to say thank you to everyone for coming and to keep in touch, because I do think after the session, you know, is when also a lot of the conversation takes place, and then we can make sure we're really working together to help one another.
Absolutely. I'd particularly like to thank you, Sal, for all the work you've done on preparing this. It's been a huge amount of work, and what you've put in over the course of the last few months as we've been building up to the launch of BISLN, absolutely tremendous. And Emma, thank you so much for being with us today. If I can just end with that reference to your article, we'll send that reference out as well, the link to that, and to David Porritz, although we didn't hear him, in fact, today because he's talking at the later session. But they are great articles and full of ideas. So Emma, thank you so much for all your ideas and taking the time from your busy, very busy IB assessment schedule to be with us. We'd really like to hear what has worked for you in planning a library year. And we'll be taking up the theme of planning in 2025 when we look at long-term development planning. Please do get in touch via our website, consiliumeducation.com. Thank you very much.